Okay, so as we mentioned, we're going to look at the Kabbalah of dreams. We're going to look at then maybe we start with the negative side of dreams, and we get to figure out. Then we move on to try to leverage the negativity of the dream to a positive thing as well. But of course, we start with the parsha, and in the parsha, of course, a lot of what unfolds and happens through dreams. So we're going to share the screen and we'll read it. It's relatively straightforward. Not sure I'm going to add much, but certainly if anyone has any comments or questions, please jump in. Don't hesitate. Okay, here we go. In the beginning of Parshat Miketz, the portion of Miketz, this week's Parsha, the Torah speaks of Pharaoh's dreams. Similarly, last week's Parsha, Parshas Vayeshev, the previous week's Torah portion, speaks of dreams, those of Joseph, and of Pharaoh's chief butler and chief baker. So we're surrounded with sort of a series of dreams that unfolds in last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha. Okay, now, all these dreams were contributing factors leading to the exile in Egypt, the root of all exiles. Since everything takes place as a result of the divine providence, it follows logically that the result, exile, shares a connection with and resembles the contributing factor, which is the dreams. So what are we doing here? First thing we're saying, the dreams are not just relevant to Egypt. The Talmud says that the word Egypt, which in Hebrew comes to the word meitzar, stress, oppression, straits, that is sort of a general word for all the exiles. In other words, when you say the Egyptian exile, you're referring to the exile in Egypt, but it's also a general word for all exiles that would follow. So what are we saying here? We're saying here that all exiles, including the later ones, are also come about, in other words, begin from the original exile, which is the Egyptian exile, which unfolds because of the dream. And now we're saying if the dream led to it, then there must be a connection between the concept of a dream and the idea of the exile. Okay. Where do you see this? So let's go and look at the Hasidic sources and figure out what's the connection between exile and a dream. And the bottom line is, the bottom line idea is going to be that in a dream, things can happen that are inconsistent with the rules of logic. And in some sense, our existence, and certainly our spiritual existence in the time of exile, is inconsistent. So we're inconsistent people during exile. So what does this mean? So let's go. As explained in various sources, including Torah Or. So Torah Or is the discourses of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad, on the Parsha. So it's explained in many sources. The connection between exile and dreams is that dreams stem from the power of imagination, which has the capacity for two opposites to coexist simultaneously. For example, if a person thought about the matter beforehand, he could even dream about seeing an elephant fit through a needle's hole. So this is a big problem. In Brachot, in chapter Brachot, in the Talmud, in Brachot, there's a disagreement. There's a whole discussion about dreams, and then there's a disagreement. The disagreement is it possible for somebody to dream of something that is so illogical, such as an elephant fitting through the hole of a needle without the hole of the needle expanding? So the Talmud has two sources. One place says yes, one place says no. So what do we do? So the Talmud itself clarifies and says, well, it's not something you would think about in a dream out of the blue. I mean, it's just too illogical. But if you try to picture it in your mind during the day, even if you think about how absurd it is, then at night you may be able to see an elephant going through a needle's hole, which is an example of opposites. The point here is, yes, a dream is a time imagination goes wild, unrestricted by the laws of logic and by the laws of what is possible and what is impossible. And therefore, the dream is a state of inconsistencies and it's just ridiculous. So that is the dream. What does that have anything to do with the exile? So the Kabbalistic and Hasidic sources elaborate and they explain as follows. Exile allows for contradictions of a similar nature. A person may think that he loves God, and at the same time, he will love his own body and indulge its desires, even though these are two loves that cannot exist simultaneously. A person can live with such an internal dichotomy to the extent that despite his professed love for God, he can, as explained elsewhere, be engulfed by his physical desires and even violate God's will. So what is a dream? A dream is two opposites can simultaneously coexist. What is exile? Again, we don't just mean geographical exile, but most importantly, we mean spiritual exile. Spiritual exile is the mind, the logic, the awareness is not functioning properly. And therefore, a person can have opposite things can coexist. On one hand, I would like to transcend and connect to spirituality and love God. On the other hand, I like things that are self-oriented and even self-destructive, and even things that are opposite of a divine will. So the question is, how do these things coexist? Logically, they cannot coexist. So what's the answer? The answer is that we're in a dreamlike state. In other words, I think what we're trying to say here is that the superficial response would say that that's because the spiritual desire and the spiritual love to God is not genuine. It's not genuine. It's just a fragment of the imagination. And therefore, I'm just fooling myself. Really, I like the things that are physical and natural and instant, that provide instant gratification. And my professed love to God is not genuine. That would be the cynical view. And actually the logical view, because how could you have two opposites simultaneously? But here you have the Kabbalistic view, and the Kabbalistic view says it's maybe a problem, but it's not that it's not true. There's an elephant and there's a needle hole, and they could coexist. You say, how could they coexist? Because we're in a dreamlike state. You say it's inconsistent. Okay, where does it say you have to be consistent? In other words, consistency is a product of the logical mind. But when the logical mind is not fully present, so our inner life is full of inner contradictions. But it's not that one is not actual and one is not real. And that's what we're going to try to do in the next paragraph, which is don't take this as a discouragement to do the right thing. So because both could be true. So Torah Or continues, explaining that such internal contradictions are consistent with the state of exile. For example, the fact that after prayer, a person may act in the opposite manner than he resolved during prayer should not be taken as proof that his prayers, Torah study, and performance of commandments of mitzvot are worthless. This is not true. In other words, the easy answer would be, I'm praying to God. And at this point, I love God. And I make a resolution that I'm only going to do what's positive and productive and constructive. And then 10 minutes later, I'm doing the opposite. So what does that mean? It means my prayer was ingenuine, was not real. Does it mean that I'm just being hypocritical? What does that mean? So Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, the Torah Or says, Rabbi Shneur Zalman quotes, and he says, no, this is not a proof that your Torah study is not, or your prayer or your mitzvot is not genuine. Instead, such a possibility results because exile is comparable to a dream state. Just as the source of a dream is from a very high source, one so transcendent in nature that it allows for the coexistence of opposites, so too a similarly transcendent source shines forth specifically in the era of exile. Consult the above-mentioned text where this is explained at length. So here we're just touching upon it. So now we're flipping everything on its head. We started out that you can have two opposites. We continue to explain that, make no mistake, it's not that one is wrong. It's just that it's inconsistencies. So in the exile, things that are inconsistent can coexist. But now we're going to a much deeper place. Now we're saying, actually, mystically speaking, the exile is actually had this higher energy here. In other words, the fact that things are not logical and can coexist actually comes from a deeper place within the soul than logic. Comes from the era of the subconscious. Comes from the space of the subconscious. In the subconscious, things are not logical. And in subconscious, things are deeper than logic. I have two things that I love. They're inconsistent. What are you going to do? Take me to court, right? They come from a place within my soul that's much deeper than logic. So we're saying actually in the exile, time of exile, when we live the inconsistencies. So from our perspective, on the surface, it's because we don't have enough awareness that they had in temple times. So that's a negative. That's a negative in the sense that we're not connected to the proper awareness and energy. But mystically speaking, in every negative, there's something deeper. And once we get to the era, to the space of exile, where there's inconsistencies, that's because the source of the energy that's available is sort of the subconscious within God. In other words, there's energy within God here that is deeper than reason, that is relevant, that is available during the time of exile. And therefore, the consistencies are not just okay, but they actually express a deeper truth. Now, this is very, very mystical and very deep, and that's why he says, okay, if you want a full elaboration, go look at those Kabbalistic sources. But now we're going to try to make it a little bit more practical in section number 2. But before that, any comments, questions, please jump in, because it's a very short section, but it is a little bit or a lot radical. Okay. L'chaim. Okay, now we're going to try to elaborate it and make it a little bit more practical. Here we go. Section 3. To clarify the lesson that a person can derive from the above with regard to his own spiritual service. Every Jew's soul is always whole, and the Torah he studied and mitzvot and studies and mitzvot he performs are eternal. In contrast, his undesirable actions are merely of fleeting nature. For every Jew will ultimately turn to God in teshuvah and repentance. Accordingly, even at the present, these undesirable acts are not viewed as enduring. They are like the lying rivers, which has described by our sages, dry up even once in 7 years. Hence, even when water is flowing in them, that water is unfit for use in the purification of a person who became ritually impure due to contact with a human corpse. In a similar way, evil can never outweigh good, for evil is transient while good always remains intact. Okay, so let's discuss this a little bit. This is actually very interesting. So there's a Mishnah, and the Mishnah talks about the laws. There's a whole tractate, in fact, in the Talmud that discusses the laws of the mikvah. What is mikvah? Mikvah is a body of water, natural water that can purify. Who needs purity? Well, all different types of people. In biblical times, if you wanted to go to the temple, or if you wanted to eat of the flesh of the sacrifices, you have to be ritually pure. And for some types of impurity, such as if a person came in contact with a corpse, with a dead person, or touched someone that came in contact with a corpse, you need to have purification that requires not just going to a mikvah, to a natural body of water, but also they sprinkle water that is considered mayim chayim, living water. Living water means that it comes from a spring. It comes directly from the earth. It's not gathered in a body of in the earth. In other words, it's not gathered in a cistern. It's not gathered in a specific place, but it's still emerging from the earth like a spring. Okay. Then there are different levels of mikvahs, all different levels of mikvah. There's 6 different categories. One of the categories are a river. A river, we say, is a mikvah, because we assume, at least for some rivers, that the river is primarily spring water. Now, if the river is primarily rainwater, then that's a problem, because rainwater can only work for a mikvah if it's gathered and in one place, not if it's flowing. A river and a spring, so a spring can purify while it's flowing, because it's considered more quote of a higher level of purity. It can purify even when it's flowing. Okay, without getting into all the details and the mysticism here, but the bottom line is like this. The Mishnah says, what happens if you have a river that lies? Oh, no, it's not a good mikvah, because then it's primarily rainwater. That's the name of the mikvah that lies. A river that lies. What does it mean, a river that lies? If it dries up once in 7 years, it's lying. It's not real. It's not true. Because what is truth? Well, I don't know. There's different definitions of truth. I think Zach told me that he once wrote, I think you gave it to me actually, a book about about lying to children, something like that, about the definition of truth. That was interesting. That was a few years ago, so I don't remember exactly. But one definition of truth is that truth is enduring. So something that you can, an experiment that you could produce in the lab 50% of the time, or even 99% of the time, is not true. To be true, it has to be enduring. There's actually a beautiful idea that in the Hebrew alphabet, the word emet, truth in Hebrew, has aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet, mem, which is the middle, and taf, which is the final letter. That's what emet, truth. In Hebrew, truth is first letter of the alphabet, middle letter of the alphabet, and the final letter of the alphabet. And the idea is that it has to endure. To be true, it has to endure. If it doesn't endure, it's not true. Okay, so that's the river. I used to go upstate New York as a kid, and I remember that in the summer, there were certain rivers or certain streams, or what do they call them? They call it not a stream, they call it a creek. There were certain creeks that maybe had 4 inches of water. And after the rain, the first time I saw it, I was in absolute shock. After a rain, like it was in one specific place I'm thinking of, it was outside, it starts raining for like 3 days. It can do that upstate. And this little creek that had like 3 inches of water becomes a river that is probably 10 feet deep, because we know how deep the creek is, and 10 feet wide. And it was unbelievable. For 3-4 days, just brown water rushing, because it was just all the earth coming along with it from all the surrounding mountains. So you look at this mighty flowing river, but it's a lie, because it's going to be gone. Now, technically speaking, so it's a lie. So it's not enduring. So what are we saying here? We're trying to say within the person's soul, we say we have different drives. We have the drive for positivity, we have the goodness, and then we have the negativity. So what's more true? We say, well, one is true. What is more true? Well, what does true mean? True mean which one feels closer to me, which one feels more natural to me? That's not our definition of truth. Maybe doing something negative feels more natural to me. And doing something transcendent feels more abstract to me. It's not as obvious. I have to work harder to get there, but that could still be the truth, depending on what we mean by true. And what we're saying here is that the positive is enduring. The negative, ultimately, I'm going to regret. And either I'm going to repent, either in this incarnation, next incarnation, but I'm going to regret it. You see it practically. You don't have to wait for another incarnation. Usually when I do something good, I don't regret it. I don't feel guilty. No one ever comes out and says, I feel guilty. What did you do? I went and helped someone cross the street. For the most part, you feel guilty when I ate too many latkes, like last night. Then I regret, right? So naturally, in other words, the good is something that ultimately you're going to hang on to. Ultimately, that's what you want. Right? At the end of your life, you look back and say, what am I happy I did? What am I not happy I did? Okay, so usually it's the positive that endures, or the desire for positivity that endures, and the desire for the negativity that falls away. So again, what's more true? So we're going to say the positive is more true. Now, even within myself, I don't feel it, but ultimately, eventually, maybe in a different incarnation, but ultimately, everybody's going to repent. Everything returns to holiness. So by the definition of truth is that truth is enduring. So which part of me is more true? Which part of me is more true is the part of the part of me that's more true is the positive. So that's the first step. Reminds me of the story in last week's parsha. In last week's parsha, there's this whole discussion that Potiphar's wife, was it last week's parsha? Yeah. Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph, and she waits for a day that nobody's home, and he comes in, and she grabs his garments, and he runs out, and she holds onto his garment. And then when her husband comes home, she shows him the garment, and he says, this is what your slave tried to do. And then he's put in prison. Now, what do we need to talk about this garment? She needs incriminating evidence. I mean, of course, they would believe her over a slave. So you could say, well, the garment, because the garment is a theme that keeps repeating itself with Joseph. In the beginning of the parsha, you have Joseph's colored garments. That's sort of his way. That's how that expresses his importance within the family. And here you have the garments that sort of brings him down. Well, that's the literary response. But the Hasidic response is as follows. I think I said it in the past. The garments represents what is external to you. So the Hasidic masters explain the story. She tells him, you also want to sin. And he says, no, that's not, of course I want to, but that's not my core. That's just the garments. I could shed that. And that doesn't define me. And he leaves the garments, and in Hebrew, the word garment comes from the word betrayal. He leaves the betrayal in her hand. I could separate myself from the betrayal. I could separate myself from the negativity. In other words, how do I self-define? Do I define myself by my faults, by my negativity? I have it. Of course I have it. But the question is that me? Or is that something that's more external to me? So that's what we're saying. Ultimately, even though I live a life of contradiction, especially in exile, the question is what is true and what is enduring and what is real. So that now we're going back to what we're saying. In a similar vein, the positive within the person is the real, is the enduring, and the negative is the thing that is inconsistent and ingenuine. So we're used to thinking, what is more me? What is easier for me? Oh, by that definition, it's much easier to eat too many donuts than it is to transcend. Okay, but that's not the definition for us of what is real. What is real doesn't mean what is easy. Okay. The above explanation highlights an advantage the era of exile possesses. Did I skip this? In a similar way, evil can never outweigh good, for evil is transient while good always remains intact. The above explanation highlights an advantage of the era of exile possesses over the era of the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. In the era of the Beit HaMikdash, the kochos pnimiyim, the internal powers of the soul, i.e. the powers of understanding, feeling, and the like, shone forth powerfully. These powers have inherent limitations. What is holy, and what is impure. The two cannot coexist. Thus, an impure person is forbidden to enter the Beit HaMikdash. This is absolutely powerful stuff. Let's continue reading. In the era of the exile, by contrast, the encompassing powers of the soul shine forth. And regarding them, there are no limitations. In a similar vein, the Torah relates how God dwells with you amidst your impurity. That's what the verse says, that God says, God dwells with us even though we're impure. This is an absolute okay. In the times of the temple, if I am impure, I can't go to the Temple Mountain. By the way, that's true today as well. So we're all impure, and therefore religious Orthodox Jews cannot go to Temple Mountain. As a parenthesis, as an aside, there's dispute, and some people today say that based on research, we could know we are on the Temple Mount, the temple stood, and those are the parts we don't go to. But other places on the Temple Mount we are allowed to go to. And these are that's sort of the more I don't want to say liberal, but I'm going to say the newer voices. It used to be 100 years ago, it was been 80 years ago, it was universal that nobody would go, that religious Jews cannot go on Temple Mountain. And even today, the overwhelming majority of rabbis say we're not allowed to go. But in any case, we have this situation where if I'm impure, I can't go to the holiness, I can't go to the temple. That represents the times of the temple. Times of the temple is when the holiness shines forth internally within the person. What's the word I'm looking for? I internalize the holiness, so I relate to the holiness. In that state, when I have holiness internalized within me, going to the temple, so impurity is a contradiction to that. Because it's about me internalizing holiness. So I can't internalize holiness and internalize what unholiness represents, what impurity represents at the same time. Why impurity is and holiness is beyond the scope of this morning. But the bottom line is, you see that there's a contradiction. You can't have holiness and impurity in the same space. That's because we're talking about the limited light that is being internalized. What about the exile? We're not going to the temple. So what do we think? Because we're impure, God is not with us? No, God is always with us. 1 second, slow it down. If the impure person can't go to the temple because the temple is holy, so why does the impure person think that God is with him in exile? Oh, because it depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about a person's own awareness, the awareness, what the Kabbalah calls kochos pnimiyim, the internalized faculties, what I understand and what I feel. So I cannot understand and feel two opposites simultaneously. So there will be a contradiction between the light of holiness and the impurity. But we're talking about exile, where it's more like a dream state. We're not talking about so much of conscious knowledge and conscious awareness, but we're going deeper than the conscious awareness. We're going to what we would call in psychology, the subconscious, but in Kabbalah, we would call the kochos makifim, the encompassing lights. It's too great to be able to articulate it and felt in the conscious mind. Here, nothing is a contradiction for God, and God could be present with us even when we are impure. So we're talking about the advantages of the state of exile. Now, what is the lesson for us? And what we're going to say, one of the lessons are, and this was a talk actually that Rebbe spoke in the 19th of Kislev. So it's on this parsha, so they printed it under this parsha, but really, the Rebbe spoke this by 19th Kislev Farbrengen. And one of the problems, I don't want to say problems, 19th of Kislev, of course, as we mentioned, is the new year for the Hasidic teachings, which is the time that Rabbi Shneur Zalman was released from prison, and we see it as a time that the divine endorsement to spread the mystical teachings. So in traditional circles, traditional Orthodox circles, there was a very big reluctance to study Hasidic thought and Kabbalah in general, because under the idea that I'm not on that level yet. How could I go and study Kabbalah and study Hasidism and study the deep mysteries of the Torah if I'm not perfect in the law, if I'm not perfect in other areas, more basic areas of law? That was basically a psychological barrier. And what the Rebbe is going to say is, ladies and gentlemen, we're in the time of exile. Time of exile, don't look for consistency. Look to grab every opportunity. And if you have an opportunity to connect to the deep mystical parts of Torah, grab it. Say, I'm not consistent. That's okay. We're in dream. In dreams, strange things can happen. So that's sort of the response, even to myself. Should I engage in this? Should I do an act of transcendence? I don't feel this is consistent with who I am right now. Say, okay, that's you don't feel that it's consistent with who you are in your, what we would call koiches pnimiyim, your internal faculties of what you feel and what you understand at this moment. But that shouldn't be a reason, because that shouldn't be a stop. That shouldn't be a reason to distract you from doing something great, because you always say it's inconsistent with what I feel now. That's okay. We live in a time of inconsistencies. That's what a dream is. Okay, we continue. It is possible to derive the following lesson from the above concepts. There are those who err and maintain that the only path in divine service is to follow a step-by-step progression, advancing from easier tasks to more difficult. Until one has completed the initial stages, he cannot even begin to think of proceeding to more advanced ones. Such an approach would have been appropriate if every dimension of a person's conduct were well arranged and orderly. However, presently, we are like dreamers. This is a quote that I mentioned last week from the book of Psalms, that when God will bring back the captivity of Zion, we'll be like dreamers. In other words, we look back at the exile and we see the exiles as a dream. Now we're in exile. Now we're living a dream. The nature of the times allows for the coexistence of opposites, as mentioned above. Accordingly, our divine service need not conform to sequential progression. One can and should carry out any type of divine service that presents itself, following the spiritual parallel implied by our sages' directive: grab and eat, grab and drink. Haste. So this is a very interesting thing. It's a Talmudic statement where in Eruvin, where the rabbi, great sage, I forget his name, tells his son, he says, this world is like a banquet, it's like a party, it's like a wedding party. When you come to the wedding party, don't make any, eat whatever you can. You know, you come to a wedding, it's a buffet. You say, well, I'm not going to eat the dessert now because maybe I'm going to don't worry about later. Any opportunity you have, grab and eat, grab and drink. Never say no when the waiter comes around with the tray. Never say no. Grab as much as you can. Now, of course, he wasn't telling them what to eat for dinner, because he was saying this world is like a wedding hall. Grab and eat, grab and drink. What he was saying, the mystical interpretation, the obvious interpretation, actually, is he's saying, don't try to be so calculated. Any opportunity that you have, you seize that opportunity. Don't ask yourself, maybe I'll do something later, maybe I'll do something tomorrow, maybe I should conserve energy. No, if you have an opportunity to do something, grab it. If you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, grab it. Don't say that's not on my level, that's too advanced. Even one whose spiritual level has sunk to the degree that it is impossible for him to begin serving God unless he first repents for his past. In other words, I feel like I'm so bad, I have to do teshuvah. Should not abandon his Jewish practice, as the Alter Rebbe rules in Tanya, which communicates the Torah's inner mystical dimension, and in the Shulchan Aruch, which communicates the revealed framework of the revealed part of Torah. Such a person should also study Torah and absorb mitzvot. True, he is adding energy to the forces of evil. Nevertheless, he can be certain that no one will ever remain estranged from him, and he will ultimately do teshuvah. When he does, the Torah he studies with the mitzvah he performs will return with him. We discussed this on Fridays. We discussed Tanya chapter 40, I believe, or maybe it was 39, but I think it was 40. But the point was that there's never a situation where we tell somebody, you're so bad, don't do a mitzvah. You're so bad, don't study Torah. Even if your intentions are not pure and not holy, don't worry. You engage, you grab, you have an opportunity to eat, you grab it. It's not consistent. That's not our concern. We're not living in an era of consistencies. We're living in the era of dream. Ultimately, things will straighten out. Now, the fact, okay, I'm going to just read the bold. This applies not only to the revealed dimension of the Torah, and this is what I said before, the Rebbe's agenda here on the 19th of Kislev was to tell people, study Kabbalah, study Hasidism, even if you feel that it's too advanced for you spiritually, you're not really on that level, you have the opportunity, grab it, don't worry about being inconsistent. So this applies not only to the revealed dimension of Torah, but also to its inner mystic dimension and the custom and practices associated with it. Our sages, the word in an allusion to this can be found in the previously cited words of our sages. Grab and eat can be interpreted as referring to the Torah's revealed dimension, which is referred to as bread, and grab and drink can refer to the Torah's inner mystical dimension, which is referred to as water. This is very nice. Grab and eat, grab and drink. Why does he say both expressions? So the Rebbe says eating the Torah, the revealed part of Torah is likened to food, to bread, and the revealed part of Torah, the hidden part of Torah is likened to water. Why? I don't remember right now. True, in previous generations, one could not begin the study of the Pnimiyut Torah, the inner dimension of Torah, until he underwent many preparatory stages. You may have heard that you're not supposed to study Kabbalah until you're 40. He says, yeah, that was when things were consistent. Nevertheless, the world's spiritual climate has changed. In the present time, it is a mitzvah to reveal this wisdom that was cited by the Arizal in the 16th century. This is especially true after the revelation of the teachings of Hasidus by the Baal Shem Tov and Alter Rebbe and their successors. Pnimiyut Torah, the inner dimension of Torah, has now become like all disciplines of Torah study, and like them, every Jew is obligated to study it. This approach, grab and eat, grab and drink, without reckoning with one's spiritual standing or considering whether one is fit for or worthy of such study or practice, is comparable to a dream in which two conflicting objects can coexist. Moreover, this approach relates not only to dreams and exile, but also to the manner in which the Jews will emerge from exile. Through increasing the light of the Torah and mitzvot, we awaken the world from the slumber of exile and bring the true light of redemption, as it is written, God will be an eternal light for you. And as we see, it is natural to wake from sleep when light shines. So ultimately, the lights will go on. Now we're going to close everything up. We're going to come full circle with going back to the parsha. The above concepts point to the lesson to be taken from the fact that dreams led to both the exile of Egypt and ultimately the exodus from the land. The Egyptian exile was the most difficult of all exiles. For that reason, all subsequent exiles are also referred to as Egypt. Nevertheless, that exile specifically made possible a great advance, as alluded to in the promise. Afterwards, we will emerge with great wealth. When God told Abraham about the Egyptian exile, he says that there's going to be, your descendants are going to be enslaved in a foreign land, but he says then they're going to emerge with great wealth. And the mystics explain that great wealth is not just that they had a lot of money from the Egyptians that they borrowed and forgot to return and never returned, but it also means that they come with a much more heightened spiritual state, because they emerge with great wealth, not just physical wealth, but also spiritual wealth. In other words, from the state of exile, they actually reach a higher level. So that's a similar concepts apply regarding the present exile. True, all of our divine service during the era of exile is comparable to a dream state. Nevertheless, the transcendent quality associated with dreams makes it possible to attain a loftier level of divine service, to leap to a rung beyond all expectations, and increase the light of the Torah and its mitzvot. This light will rouse the world from the slumber of exile and lead to the fulfillment of the prophecy. As in the days of your exodus from Egypt, I will show the people wonders. The coming of Mashiach may take place speedily in our days. Adapted from a talk that Rebbe delivered on Yud Tes Kislev, the 19th of Kislev, 1956. Again, that's why you have to see when the Rebbe spoke about it, and you see what he was trying to achieve here. And the point here is, even if I feel like I'm not fully worthy to engage in this mystical study, don't worry about being inconsistent. So, in short, what are we saying? We're saying, while at the surface, time of exile is a time of inconsistency in the negative sense, that my love to God doesn't take me over, and therefore I can coexist with that. I can also have negative loves and destructive loves. So the first step we say is it doesn't mean that the holiness is not genuine. That's the idea of a dream. Two things can coexist, even if it's not logical. That's fine. That's okay. And then we get to the deeper mystical point, which is that when you're talking about the light that can be perceived, what you understand, the awareness you can internalize, there's a contradiction between opposites. And that's why in temple times, if I'm impure, there's a certain limit of which I can't go to the temple. I can't have these two energies coexist, because I was able to internalize to some degree some of the light. And if I internalize some of the light, I cannot simultaneously internalize negativity, because one vessel cannot hold two opposites. But in the time of exile, we say there is the encompassing light. Here I'm tapping into an energy that is more like the subconscious. In other words, it is not expressed. It's too deep to be expressed in a limited form. So it cannot be internalized. If it cannot be internalized, it's actually a deeper light, and therefore there's no contradictions. And wherever you are, in any state, even in a state of negativity, that light is always there. And therefore God is with us even in the state of impurity. So this is actually very deep because we're looking at something that at the surface would seem like a contradiction, a problem. And the surface would say that shows that our goodness is not genuine. And here we're turning it on its head and saying, no, the goodness is genuine, A, and B. The idea that it can coexist actually stems from a higher source. And in the exile, we can tap into that deeper dimension. So that is the pitch. That is the story in short. Thank you all. Thank you. The bottom line is you have to grab and drink and grab and eat any opportunity. You take it and you invest and you don't think, well, maybe I'm not worthy. Maybe this is beyond me. Grab every experience you can. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. It was absolutely beautiful, beautiful talk, beautifully presented. I'm still kind of under like the spell of the initial metaphor of the elephant and the needle hole, because they do.
Don't think about this too much because you're going to dream about it at night.
Yes, to the risk of risking, to the point where I'm risking it, because they do coexist. They do coexist, but where you can actually physically go into that hole, right? They do coexist. So you just grab it, like to expand that metaphor. You just grab it whenever possible, hoping that eventually it will go through that needle hole.
I guess that's the idea. In other words, in which dimension? A dimension of reality as we know it, it can't go through. You can have a needle and you can have an elephant, but it cannot go through. You can't have something so massive go through something so small. So we say, could things that look unusual happen? Could opposites coexist? Well, when we're looking with logical eyes, the answer is no. We're looking with dreamy eyes, the answer is yes. Which reality is more true? Now, of course, we want the reality that the logical reality. Ultimately, we want messianic era. We want revelation. We want awareness. And with that, we want to wake up from the dream. And when you wake up from the dream, you'll have only the positive and not the negative. So in one sense, yes, of course, we don't want a dreamy reality. We want a real reality. Okay, that's true. However, while we're in the dream, make no mistake, there are certain advantages to dreams. Whereas that when it's dreams, you could make certain leaps, even physically speaking. In dreams, you could have a dream. What's my dream? I'm going to be successful beyond my wildest imagination. Now, if I didn't have this dream, I would not be successful. If I have this dream, I am successful many times. Logically, I didn't understand all the steps and I had to leap, and some of the leaps were illogical. Doesn't matter. Things happen that are illogical in the world. So I'm not limiting myself to the realm of what is logical. And that's the skill of dreaming. And sometimes I'm dreaming, I think I'm going to survive. There's no reason to think I'm going to survive. And we talk about this Jewish history. If you asked me 2,000 years ago, if you asked Judah the Maccabee, would you survive the Greek army? He would say no. It's a dream. I don't even think he dreamt it. I think the thing was suicidal to begin with. I don't think they were planning on winning. But that's another story. But the point here is, yes, sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you use the eyes of logic, and logic tells you can't do it, and you believe you can't do it, then you can't do it. And if you're in a dreamy reality, there's certain advantages to it. Even in this physical world, there's certain advantages to it. In the spiritual world, there are also advantages, not just in perception, not just subjective, but also objectively. Because objectively, we can get to a place that's deeper than logic. In the human consciousness, it's the subconscious, and in the divine energy, we call it pnimi, the internal light, and the encompassing light. And encompassing light is infinite. It's too great for the vessel to contain it. And therefore, it just hovers above. And therefore, it doesn't really matter what's inside the vessel. I could have impurity in the vessel. It doesn't matter. I still have access to the encompassing light that surrounds it. But we're going to learn more about the encompassing light in Tanya, not next week, not this week, in chapter 47, but the following week, chapter 48. So this is the paradox. When the light is so great, it encompasses, it surrounds, it doesn't really matter what's going on in the vessel. If you want to put a little bit of drop of that light into the vessel, now you have to worry about what's in the vessel. Now the vessel has to be clean. So it's going to pervert the light. So there's an advantage, of course, to have a logical reality. But there's also an advantage to a dreamy reality. And both are true and both have an advantage.
Thank you. We just hope that we get more aware of that superconscious, which we are not.
Be aware that we're dreaming. The problem is when we think we're awake and we're dreaming, we're aware of the pitfalls and the opportunities of the dream. The danger of not knowing that I'm in a dream is to say, I'm completely logical, I'm completely consistent, and therefore I'm going to be consistent. And therefore, because it's natural and easy for me to be negative, so why would I engage in positivity? Because that would be a contradiction. Why would I try to transcend? Why would I try to go beyond myself? Why do I try to develop a love to God if that's not where I am? I don't love God. I love negativity. So we're saying you're climbing up the wrong tree. You're trying to achieve consistency. Spiritually, that's not what is needed right now. You don't have to be authentic and you don't have to be consistent. That's not what we're doing. You have to get with the times. And we are in we are in a dreamy state. That's all. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. We should have the advantages of the dream. And like the Rebbe said, eventually the lights will turn on and we'll have the awareness of everything that's around us, the full awareness. And then we'll be able to have, I guess, both advantages. We could dream while we're awake. So that would be the best. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. Happy Hanukkah. See each other in good health. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Hanukkah.